very much. Thank you, Keren, and thank you for having me at the conference. As you heard from Shira, I'm a business school professor, but I study technology and its impact on business and society and public policy. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is the field that I've been involved in the last several years called gamification. And I'll explain what that means for those of you who don't know. I'm delighted to be here in Israel. I'm actually here with my family. My 2 kids are out here in the audience as well. So for us, this is actually a game of vacation, as well as a talk about gamification. All right, so here's the starting point. When I say games, what do you think about? You probably think about something like this, a board game like Monopoly. Maybe you think about puzzles. Maybe you think about sports. The World Cup, I know, is on many people's minds, including here in Israel. Maybe you think about video games. But almost certainly, you don't think about the workplace. Almost certainly, when we talk about games, you don't think about school and education. And almost certainly, you don't think about consumer interactions in business. But the point that I'd like to make is maybe you should. Maybe there is something in games that is relevant to all those fields. And maybe there are things that we can understand from games and apply to all those kinds of contexts. And why do I think this? Well, some of the numbers are quite compelling. So this is just one example I pulled out almost at random. This is Cityville, fairly trivial seeming social game on Facebook made by a company called Zynga. And the interesting thing about this is this number. Cityville went from 0 to 100 million registered users, and they did it in 41 days. 6 weeks, 100 million people playing this game. There's something there. There's clearly something that engages people even in these very simple kinds of games. And that number is actually even fairly small compared to some of the more recent games. Angry Birds has been downloaded over 2 billion times. It's a big number. It's not only about 7 billion people in the world. 2 billion times for slingshotting little red birds at bizarre-looking green pigs to knock down their houses. What's going on there? And if you talk about even some of the more recent games, games like Candy Crush Saga and Clash of Clans, each generate over $1 billion a year in revenues on free-to-play games. So clearly there's something going on. And in fact, all of these are small compared to the most successful video game of all time, which I'd ask you to guess what the most successful video game of all time is, but no one ever gets it. Turns out the most successful video game of all time is Windows Solitaire. 9 billion hours people spent playing Windows Solitaire all the way back in 2003. Why? They played at work. It's more engaging than what they should be doing at work. So there's something there. And the question that my research and work jumps off from is, what can we learn? How do we learn things from what makes these games engaging and then apply that to things that aren't games? Apply that to things that are not pure entertainment and in fact have business and other applications. So that's this area called gamification. In many ways, it's a terrible term. It sounds a little bit too silly for lots of people. I often get these questions, well, okay, this is fine for little startups and so forth, but not for big companies. It turns out that there are many, many huge enterprises, governments, Fortune 500 companies applying these gamification techniques. They may not call it that, but fundamentally it's about motivation. It's not about the game. It's not about the interface or the enjoyment purely for entertainment. It's about moving people to do something. So gamification I define as the process of making activities more game-like. 2 things there. One is it's a process. It's not that something starts at one point and is not game-like, and then at a certain point it is game-like. We can always make things more game-like, even games. I watch the games that my kids play, and all of the games that they play, even things like Minecraft, which started off as purely open-ended kinds of games, are now gamified. They've got achievement systems, they've got point systems, they've got things to unlock. There's an additional game layer, an achievement layer built on top of the games, because even the game designers realize that there are engagement techniques that they can optimize. So gamification is a process, and it's a process of making something game-like. And game-like doesn't just mean it has some visual interface, it's some fantasy world. Game-like means it's a set of rules, a goal, some objective in the game, and something that creates a game-like attitude. You care about achieving the objective. You care about following the rules, playing the game to get to the result. It engages you to make you want to get to some objective, and that's what's powerful in business context. So when I describe it in this general way, game-like structures that engage people, it's pretty general. And in some ways, this is nothing new. So for many years, we've had loyalty programs, reward programs, things like frequent flyer programs. Here I've got the Starbucks coffee reward program. You go and buy coffee, you earn some points every time you come, and then you get rewards based on that. Well, that's a game-like structure in a way. That is in some ways a proto-gamification. So the question is, well, okay, is there anything really new here? Is it interesting talking about gamification as a field? Is there anything that we have to learn other than do something like this? And I'd like to suggest actually there's a lot that's new here, really in two major areas. The first is we can study what exactly makes up these games. So when we talk about a game, you see the overall experience, but there are repeating patterns. There are atomic units, structures in games that come up again and again. Things like point systems, things like quests or missions that the game sends you on, things like levels, avatars, and so forth, all different mechanisms we see in lots of games. Now, it's not the case that the more you put in of these, the more fun the game is. They're design patterns. They're tools that you can use in different ways, and they need to be applied in the right way for the right context. But there are things that we can take out of games and look at how game designers put them into their games and apply them to other contexts. So here's a quick example. This is Empires and Allies, another one of these Zynga Facebook type games. And you see here the familiar kind of visual game interface. But if you break it down, we can see these various different elements. Things like the point systems, the idea of progression, the idea that there's a bar that says, here at the top right, you see we're at the beginning of the level. As you move through, the bar fills up till you get to the end of the level. All these are different structures that are common structures in games. And then we can take those structures and put them into something that's not a game. So this example is a site called KEAS, K-E-A-S. It's a enterprise health and wellness service. So they go into large companies and partner with them, and typically they're health insurance companies, to try to encourage people to exercise more, eat better, engage in better health and wellness practices. Very important in the United States, where healthcare is a massive cost and is partly borne by the employers. The companies want people to be healthier. They want them to be healthier for better productivity. They want them to be healthier to save money on their insurance. But it's hard to get people to act healthier. How do you get someone to stick with an exercise program or a diet program? And what they found was just giving people the data isn't enough. This company was founded by an ex-Google and Microsoft engineer, and he thought, great, we'll do the quantified self. We'll just show people the data, show them what their health information was, and that will get them to change their behavior. Didn't work. Just showing people the data is not enough because we have all these psychological factors that causes us to not want to change our behavior. So what they did was they gamified it. They set up a series of quizzes, they set up a series of challenges, team-based challenges using all these same kinds of game elements, quests, leaderboards, badges, and so forth. And they found a huge movement in terms of people's activity. In fact, they initially created a bunch of these little quizzes to have people go through, and they thought, okay, we've got enough quizzes now for 6 months. And people went through all the quizzes in the first week because they were so engaged in the activity. So that's an example of gamification. So one piece is these elements, understanding how to deploy these pieces of games and put them into things that aren't a game. But it's deeper than that. So there are three broad areas, which I won't really talk about in detail here, but areas that we can learn from and apply to gamification. One is psychology. Psychology has a lot to say about what motivates people. And there actually are two broad streams in psychology, both of which are relevant. One is behaviorism, which goes back many years and shows that rewards, positive reinforcements, as well as negative reinforcements, can cause people to learn, cause people to change behavior. If you give someone a reward, they will internalize what they have to do to get the reward. And there's a lot of literature about what kinds of rewards. It's better if it's intermittent. You don't necessarily want to expect the reward and so forth. Lots of literature on that. And games can provide rewards, not just tangible rewards, but virtual rewards. Seeing you got a high score, seeing you achieve points, seeing you got to the next level is a kind of reward. So we can use the behavioral psychology. But we can also use the cognitive psychology, the psychology that grew up in response to behaviorism, understanding what really matters to people. What do people really find motivating? There's a branch of psychology called self-determination theory, which asks about what they call intrinsic motivation. What would you do for its own sake? What would you do if no one paid you, no one gave you any reward, you would just do it because you want to? And that literature says there are basically three attributes. Competence, which is basically mastering something, doing better, being successful at it. Autonomy, which means being in control, making your own choices. And what they call relatedness, which is sort of being part of something larger than yourself, either having some sense of purpose or some sense of social, communal interaction. And all of them are relevant in games. So we can apply all of those elements of psychology to bear on gamification. Then we can apply design. Game design is a design practice. So there's been a huge movement in business schools and elsewhere, often coming out of Stanford and IDEO, about what's called design thinking. Using design techniques. What do designers do in product design and so forth? And applying that to designing a business, designing a process, designing anything. Using concepts like rapid prototyping and ideation, coming up with lots of ideas. Being human-centric, focusing on the needs of who you're designing for, and iterating, testing and iterating many times. We can apply all those design thinking techniques here to design these game-like structures. And the third one's analytics, data. Every activity in a digital game can be tracked. You know every little action someone takes and what the response was, what the reaction was. So we can build systems that have very strong closed-loop analytics to make an environment that people find more engaging. Essentially, all these are about feedback. Games are feedback engines. When you fall in a pit of lava when you're playing a video game, that's feedback that you did something wrong. And it's feedback in a good way. It gives you a direct response. You see exactly what you did and the consequence. But then you get another life. You don't stay dead. You're encouraged to experiment and try something new. That's what games do, and we can think about building feedback using these fields to be successful. Essentially, what we're talking about is fun. Unpacking what we mean by saying something is fun. Fun doesn't just mean light and easy. We find things fun often if they're challenging. What's fun is overcoming obstacles or sharing it with other people in a social environment. So if we can really deconstruct in a scientific way what people find fun in different contexts, we can then apply that to business. So let me give you a few examples. The USA Network, television network in the United States, has a show called Psych, one of their more popular shows, and they wanted to engage viewers of the show. They wanted to get people who were already viewers of the show to become more regular viewers. They wanted them to go back and watch old shows. They wanted them to tell their friends. They wanted them to encourage other people to watch the show. They wanted them to buy merchandise on their website, generate additional revenue streams. So they created this site called Club Psych. It's an online gamified site in parallel with the television show. And it's got all the typical gamification elements. You earn points for doing various kinds of challenges, activities like watching old episodes of the show on the website, answering questions, going into a little virtual room like the characters of the show, and so on and so forth. And all this gives you access to virtual rewards, including things online like virtual badges, as well as in some cases tangible rewards, signed poster by the cast of the show and so forth. So they put this into effect, and they found a tremendously successful response. It doubled the traffic on the game website and brought the traffic of the overall network website up by 30%, increased merchandise sales, increased page views, generated huge social media activity. They got people to share the site with a reach of 40 million viewers on social media, which is far greater than the viewership of the show. The show has about 4 million weekly viewers, which is still a lot for a cable TV show in the United States, but they reach many more people by using this gamified site to encourage people. So that's a marketing example. That's where some of the first examples of gamification started, but it's grown from there. So for example, in training, not just learning in an educational sense, there's application of gamification in school, but also in business learning environments. Gamification is a powerful way to motivate people because in order to learn, you've got to be engaged. You've got to want to start, and you've got to want to keep through the class and get to the end. So this I have up here is a picture of a site called Duolingo. It's a language learning service, mobile language learning service that is relentlessly gamified. So they've got, again, points, they've got progress bars, they've got badges that you unlock. There's a whole virtual little game built around the process of language learning. And that's one of the key differentiators of this site over other tools. They've now got over 30 million users, and Duolingo last year was the #1 app of the year in the Apple iPhone App Store, based on the power of these gamification elements. But it's also useful in an enterprise context. This is an example from Zappos, online retailer that is now part of Amazon.com. Their challenge was they wanted to promote camaraderie. They wanted to, there's a fast-growing company like a lot of startups, and they wanted to get people across product groups to still spend time together, to talk to each other, to collaborate. So what they did was they put in a very simple little gamified activity. When you log on to the intranet at Zappos as an employee, you get a picture like this. Shows you a picture of one of your coworkers. And then it puts up some buttons, says, okay, who is this? Do you know who this person is? And one of them is the right person's name, and then there's other names it randomly generates. And you click on something. If you get it right, it says, great, you're logged into the intranet. If you get it wrong, it says, all right, well, this is actually Jennifer. Here's who she is. Here's her page on the company intranet. Here's some information about her. And there's a link at the bottom. It said, would you like to invite her to meet for coffee? Don't have to. Meet for coffee, I guess, means something in Israel sometimes. But would you like to have lunch with her or something? So it gives you an opportunity to network with that person. It's a little fun thing. It doesn't require you to do something, but it gives them a little encouragement for this kind of collaboration, which they've seen substantially increase the interaction of people across these product groups. We can also use gamification for very traditional kinds of enterprise workplace situations. This is a service called Objective Logistics, and they use gamification for service industries, things like restaurants. And you think, well, how could you gamify that? That doesn't seem like a particularly fun kind of environment. Well, the issue in restaurants, again, is feedback. So the servers don't necessarily know how they're doing. They don't have great visibility into how well they are doing at encouraging people to purchase higher ticket items, to spend more at the restaurant, have a good experience. And the restaurant managers don't necessarily have good visibility into what the servers are doing. So Objective Logistics creates these analytics and provides in a kind of game-like interface a scorecard that goes to the servers and also goes to the restaurant managers. For the servers, especially in the United States, where tips are a very significant part of their income, the incentive is if you are doing well, then you can get access to better shifts. You would like to have the dinner shift on the popular night because it means you have a potential for much greater tips than have the less popular lunch day when you're working. And for the employers, it gives them much better visibility to how people are doing. And by providing this feedback in a well-designed way, it encourages people to do better. It doesn't just say, well, you did badly. It says, all right, here's how you rank vis-a-vis other people, and gives you some insights into how you're doing and be able to break it down and then improve how you're doing. And they've been able to show with this service a 2 to 4% direct bottom line impact based on deploying this technology. Doesn't sound like all that much. The average profit margin of a restaurant in the United States is 3%. So that's actually a very significant number, given nothing else is changing in the restaurant. They're just putting in this motivational layer for the servers, actually has a direct effect in terms of revenue growth. So gamification is being adopted, again, by all kinds of companies in pretty much every industry, and even in some surprising places. So it turns out the IDF has gotten on the bandwagon of this as well. In 2012, during the Gaza operation, they put up a website, a public website, to try and put out information about their perspective on what was going on, given all the different views in the press. And it was a gamified site. They encouraged people who were supporters to go on missions, to earn badges, to level up in terms of their participation on the site. Now this, of course, at least in the US, was fairly controversial. But it shows that they saw the opportunity of this technique for motivation. Again, gamification is a way to motivate people, can be used in any context. So it's not just the Israelis that have figured this out. The National Security Agency in the United States, turns out, as part of the Snowden documents that have been declassified, we've discovered that in some of the bases in Europe, NSA agents were using what they called skills points when they were analyzing some of this mass surveillance information they were collecting from scanning all the phone records and online records of people. They used game-like incentives, virtual points, to reward and motivate the agents to try and extract useful information. And it turns out the bad guys use it too. So there was an article in Foreign Policy magazine a couple years ago. They went and looked at Jihadi websites, Al-Qaeda associated types of websites, and they found all of them were gamified. They all had leveling systems and virtual points and so forth. I mean, believe me, it's not because they took my class or something like that. They want to find the true believers. They want to find people who are really committed to the cause. They want to motivate people, but they also want to identify sort of the high achievers, the people who they can give access to more secret information, the people they can allow to be moderators on the site, and so forth. So they all use gamified structures. So the point is, this is something powerful, and it's being adopted in lots and lots of areas. But it's not a magic bullet. People think, okay, great, so we'll just put in these points and these leaderboards and stuff. There are lots of challenges to doing it effectively. Many of them are about optimizing so it works more effectively, but an important thing to keep in mind is people do surprising things. People game the system. People respond in unexpected ways. So this is something, I think they have these in Israel too, these monitoring devices they put up on streets to tell you how fast you're going, deployed in lots of places by the police. Now generally there's nothing connected to it. It's not that you're going to get a speeding ticket, it's just showing you how fast you're going. But people actually slow down. It's a feedback mechanism. The fact that it showed that someone sees how fast you're going up there on the street actually, on average, causes people to go about 10% slower through that intersection. This is an interesting example showing how people respond in surprising ways. You see the little monitoring device there in the middle, and you may not be able to read it, but up here at the, down here at the bottom, people have put up a high scoreboard. So it says, this is your name and your score. How fast did you go through the intersection? And the highest score, of course, is the fastest one. Not at all what the police had in mind. So people do surprising things. So doing gamification, again, it's a design process. It's about understanding how to anticipate how people are going to react and design around it. That's what game designers do. A game designer knows people are going to try to push the game in different ways, so the design process is designing around it. So what does that entail? Well, a bunch of things that I describe as thinking like a game designer. Very quickly, a couple elements of what that entails. I'm actually going to do a full-day workshop here tomorrow, and I think there's still room to sign up if anyone is interested. It's an affiliation of the Socialize conference. It's a day-long workshop on some of the practical techniques for gamification. We're actually going to look at how to apply a bunch of these design principles, which is very briefly what some of them are. Game designers think a lot about different kinds of players. People are different. Some people are more motivated by achievement. You want to win. You want to get a high score. You want to beat someone else. Some people are more motivated by exploration. You want to see what's possible. You want to see what you can do in the game. Some people care about expression. You want to personalize. You want to express your own voice in the game. And some people care about socializing. You want to interact with your friends, work together, collaborate, show your friends how you're doing, and so forth. Now, these are not absolute types. We all have all four of these and other different attributes in ourselves, and even in the same game, sometimes we may respond differently in different ways. But different things in the game activate all these different motivators. So doing effective game design and doing effective gamification design involves thinking about how to respond to different kinds of motivators, not just designing something for the achievers. People often think gamification is all about competition. And it actually turns out when researchers have studied competitive incentives, say in the workplace, versus collaboration structures, getting people to engage in teamwork, the collaboration is actually over 2 times more powerful. The effect is 2 times greater in terms of how much it motivates people than pure competition. And competition, the people who win may love it, the people who don't win or who don't think they can win make it turned off. So there's some value in the competitive structures, but also value in collaboration, cooperation, and also in these other areas. The second big design pattern in game design is called the player journey. The game can't stay the same. If you just put up points and so forth, someone needs to give him a game, I think. Yeah, that would help. But, if you just make the game the same, it gets boring. So at the bottom here, when you're just starting, what we call onboarding in game design, you're a newbie, you need to learn how to play the game. The game needs to draw you in and teach you how to play the game. But as you get more sophisticated, that becomes boring. What was interesting at the beginning is now no longer interesting to you. The game has to evolve. And it has to evolve in an interesting way. If it's purely linear, then our brains sort of turn off. Our brains anticipate things. So games are designed with this wave-like structure. They're what are called boss fights, really hard challenges that make you feel good to overcome, and then you get up to another level, and so forth. So designing in this way to move people up that path towards mastery. And the final piece is testing. Designers of games call it play testing. You never really know what people are going to do. This is true in a business context as well. So you need to prototype and test religiously, relentlessly, to find out how people are going to act and respond. These are some of my students at the Wharton School in Pennsylvania going through a game design exercise. We do a lot of this in practice because that's the only way to figure out how to get things effective. So those are a few broad design patterns. That's just the tip of the iceberg. If you're interested in more details, as you heard, I have a class on Coursera. It's not yet scheduled for the next session, but you can go to the Coursera website, look for the gamification course, sign up on the watch list. I also have a book called For the Win that goes into this in more detail, and I'm doing the workshop tomorrow. I'll end with this quote from Eric Schmidt of Google, because I think it's a good summation of what's going on. He says he thinks in the future everything's going to look like a multiplayer game. Those are the interfaces that people are familiar with and comfortable with, and they're the interfaces that motivate people towards any activity. I would modify it slightly, think everything won't necessarily look like a game, but more and more things are going to feel like a game. They're going to create that rewarding experience that good games do. So that's, I think, the challenge for all of us that are in business, whether trying to do it formally as gamification or not, understanding how to create engaging and rewarding experiences. And these are some of the techniques, I think, that can help us to get there. So thank you very much for your time. Happy to take a few questions. Do we have any questions? Yeah? Good. Okay. Yeah. Oops, you just keep. Sure, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you notice, on the tipping slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So if you notice on the tipping slide, the percentage of tips
right.
was lower than the average for the restaurant.
Yeah.
But for level of sales,
Uh-huh.
it was significantly higher.
Yep.
So I'm wondering what lines you can analyze that. Does it mean that the people that you're serving aren't happy because you're getting them to buy more, so they're leaving her less of a tip?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, and so this starts with, so when I talk about gamification design, I have a 6-step process. The first one is defining your objectives. The second one is defining your specific target behaviors. So obviously, someone who's doing the gamification doesn't know anything about the restaurant industry, doesn't know anything about this particular client. So you would start with saying, okay, what are your metrics? What are your KPIs or whatever it is, and how do they interact? What do you really care about? And it may vary. It may be that even in the restaurant industry, one restaurant is different than other in terms of the upscale or not and so forth. And again, this is part of this testing process that I talked about. that sometimes you get perverse effects. So another example is call centers, say. Lots of gamification going on in call centers. And initially, the gamification was based on the number of calls. They say, we want people to handle more calls. But what happened was when they incentivized handling more calls, people just started getting off the phone way too quick, and customer satisfaction went down. Good design is about coming up with incentives and metrics that get people to do the right sorts of things. You can build anything into the game, even a very complicated structure. It's not just you get a point for this, a point for that. It's like you have to get 5 customers in a row rate you as excellent on their customer satisfaction scale. Only then do you get points, or only then you get something. So that obviously has to be done in consultation with the client. But absolutely, there certainly are possibilities where we could incentivize the wrong way. Yes. Yes. We have very little solid data. The question, if you didn't hear, was what's the biggest research question on the effectiveness of gamification? We have dozens and dozens of case studies that suggest these effects, like the ones I've showed you. Some of them are fairly robust, but we have very few actual controlled studies and experiments. One of the first ones was actually done by a colleague of mine at Wharton named Ethan Mollick, and another Wharton colleague named Nancy Rothbard, where they looked at setting up a gamification structure in a sales environment, and were actually able to show a significant improvement in positive affect, which was valuable in that context. But there's actually very few of these. So just being able to do the kind of baseline studies and saying, what works and doesn't, because of course it's not that this is every kind of gamification is going to work. There's people like me and other people in academia starting to do that empirical work, but we're really just starting to define it from an academic sense. Okay? Yes. Good question. Borderline between gamification and manipulation. So the short answer is voluntariness. So is the player, remember autonomy is really important for motivation. Is the player still in control? Does the player have is there transparency? So if I tell you, okay, you're a server at this restaurant, we're putting in this gamified system, here's how it works. We're going to tell if you're getting more tips, less tips, and here's what's in it for you. You have an opportunity if you perform well to get a more advantageous position. But of course, in that situation, it's a zero-sum game, right? If someone else gets the good shift, then you may, if someone gets the good shift, someone else doesn't get the good shift. But if you're transparent to employees and say, here's what we're creating for you, and here's how this works, then it tends to not be manipulative. If we don't disclose to the employees what's going on, or in fact, in some cases, mislead them, that we say, okay, we're just doing this so that work is more fun. This is a little fun little thing, and we don't tell them that we're using it to assign their work shifts based on performance, then it gets manipulative. And that is almost always, in the end, counterproductive. Because people see through these things, and it becomes problematic. So it's certainly an important thing to worry about. My background is as a lawyer. I actually teach business ethics, among other things, in business school. And so when I do these detailed presentations on gamification, I always say, look, there's some legal issues to consider, but there in particular are real ethical concerns. And mostly it comes down to it, as the designer, if you keep in mind that you are not trying to force people to do something. You are trying to create an environment where people genuinely want to do something that is genuinely good for them. If you can't answer the question, is this good for the player, is this good for the participant, then you should look at whether it's being manipulative. All right. Great. All right, thank you very much.